The results of last year's local government election were a bombshell. The ANC has fallen below 50% of the vote for the first time in history. Coalition governments have now been formed across the country, and this could be a preview of how South Africa will be governed after the 2024 national election, the beginning of a post-ANC era. We now have DA mayors in 36 municipalities across the country, including Tshwane, Joburg, Ekurhuleni, Cape Town, and Umgeni. These mayors are already hard at work to protect residents from the failures of national government, from providing affordable energy and reliable public transport to deploying more law enforcement officers to keep communities safe. In the spotlight this week, we get the inside track on how DA mayors will get things done. To discuss all of this and more, we're joined in studio by DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille, by Gwen Ngwenya, the DA's Head of Policy, and Geordin Lewis, the Mayor of Cape Town. And on Zoom, we are joined by the Mayor of Johannesburg, Dr. Mpho Phalatse. Welcome. Helen, it's been about a month since some of these coalition agreements have been announced. Early days, but how are things going so far?
Well, things are going very well in 12 municipalities where the DA has an overall majority. And in the places that we've had to negotiate coalitions, in the simplest ones, two-party coalitions, in the most complex ones, up to 10-party coalitions, things are going differentially. And I think it is safe to say that I hope this round of negotiations and the consequences will give voters a much deeper insight into what they're voting for. The harder it is to negotiate complex coalitions with tiny parties that hold the balance of power and switch sides at a whim on very minor pretexts, makes it almost impossible for a municipality to focus on service delivery. So much time and energy is spent on holding the coalition together that service delivery has to take a back seat, because obviously you can't do any service delivery at all if you're not in power, and if you let the ANC EFF back to loot the coffers. So it becomes a priority to stay in government, but the energy and the time, just this past week, for 3 nights we have negotiated till 12 o'clock. And of course, we had those days in December where we were negotiating 18 hours a day and doing the horse trading. And the duplicity and the difficulty and the lack of integrity in some cases, not all, but in some cases, is truly shocking. And one day I'll have to write a book about this so that people can really understand what goes on behind the scenes and know what the consequences of their voter choice is. So, of course, we have a multi-party democracy, and of course, voters have a choice, and we accept the voters' choice and we have to live with it. The problem for voters is that in the end, they have to live with it too. And the consequences in most cases is failing service delivery. We are doing our utmost with some very reliable coalition partners and some very unreliable coalition partners to hold these things together and to usher in the post-ANC era in South Africa.
Helen, one of the things that we said we'll do differently this time is to have properly written, negotiated coalition agreements. And I think, speaking about the difficulties of these agreements, the question that often comes up, how do you enforce them? Because, of course, you can't really enforce them in a court of law. So how does that work?
That's a very important question. We have an excellent coalition agreement that we initially drafted and then negotiated with our coalition partners. We've signed 22 of them across the country in 7 out of the 9 provinces. So that's where we govern in coalitions. In a full 7 out of the 9 provinces, we have municipalities. Some are going very well, as I said, others not. So what is the penalty? You can't enforce them in the court of law. The ultimate penalty is the court of public opinion and the court of the voters. Parties that are seen to be giving cities and towns back to the ANC and EFF must live with the consequences of their choices in the public domain. We will make sure that the public knows the objective and fair truth. We won't embellish or spin anything. But if parties, by their decisions, give cities and towns back to the ANC EFF to loot at will and to destroy those cities and towns finally, despite what the majority of voters wanted, those parties must live with the consequences of their choices. And it's voter judgment that is the ultimate sanction.
And that's why it's so very important for people to pay attention to what parties are doing in these coalitions. Geordin, you don't have the problem of a coalition. You've got a clear 50% plus one majority in the city of Cape Town. You've been in the job for 60 days now. How are things going in Cape Town?
Thank you, Cilliers. And listening to Helen this morning, I feel very blessed and lucky not to have that problem, and very grateful to the voters of Cape Town. And I suppose the lesson is for voters to replicate that elsewhere. But, you know, so much of the early weeks of government are spent getting all of your targets and priorities and programs in order. And in keeping with what we said in the election and today's theme, so much of this time has been spent specifically on figuring out our targets, our investment, our budgets on energy, safety and security, and public transport in particular. Because if we really want to make a meaningful difference in shielding people, sheltering people from these critical national failures, those are really the three priority areas where you've got to do it. So I've tried to divide my time roughly equally between improving the basic service delivery that is the primary responsibility of local government and making sure that we are getting our infrastructure investment right and tightening up those budgets, and spending the other half of my time focusing on really those things that I think local government is increasingly going to have to do over the coming decade, and particularly DA local governments. If we are serious about growing our economies and giving people better life chances, we're going to have to take more space in safety, in public transport, and in energy. So that's roughly how I've split my time. And there's been pleasing progress on those fronts. We said in the election that it was a priority for us to get what we call the N2 Expressway up and running. It's basically a city bus service right to Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha.
That's now been secured.
2 days ago, we got that signed finally, and next week we should have the buses up and running.
Great.
In the next couple of weeks, we should be going to market with our first big renewable energy purchase. So there's some really exciting things happening on all three of those fronts.
And amidst all of this stuff, you've also gotten time to be on the ground and attend to issues and speak to voters, which is admirable.
Yeah.
Mpho, you do not have the advantage that Geordin has of a clear majority government, and we've seen the attempts by ANC and EFF councillors to disrupt your council meetings in Joburg, which are very important, especially at the start of a term. How are you coping with the disruptions and the challenges of the new job?
Multi-party government.
Oh, there we have you. We can hear you now.
Yes.
Great, Mpho.
Yes, Joburg has a multi-party government. Currently, we're sitting on 9 political parties in Johannesburg. So
That's
we
tough.
all envy Geordin. We envy Peter Texera in Midvaal. They've got such stability and they can focus on giving services to residents. But we believe that we will settle, and we believe that we'll be able to do that. But in the meantime, we really started getting to work immediately. We've tabled what we term our golden start to set our City of Gold off on a brand new trajectory. We started with 4 days induction with the MMCs, where they interrogated the true state of the city of Johannesburg with officials. And then they came back with a 3-day strategic planning session where they came up with turnaround strategies across all functional areas. But you need the right governance framework in order to deliver services to residents. So we've started working on that by professionalizing the city through various interventions, including filling critical vacancies. You'll know that we haven't had a city manager for almost a year now. Various other Section 56 positions have also been vacant. We've started the process of filling those vacancies. We are now getting our adjustment budget drawn up, and we're hoping to have it passed in the next few weeks. And this budget will be 100% in service to our residents. We'll also be restoring service with pride in all our various functional areas. We're working hard to fix the billing issue. You know that Joburg has always had this billing crisis for many years. We'll make sure that our residents can trust the bills that they receive so they can pay their bills and we can collect the revenue that we need to render services. We also make sure that it's easy for residents to communicate with the city. So we're working on our internal systems and processes. We're already rooting out corruption. We've already suspended a senior official on allegations of corruption, and we'll be continuing to respond harshly to all such cases. So we've been really working on making sure that the institution is fit for purpose so that it can carry our mandate and our strategies forward as we turn our city around.
Great. Gwen, you're the DA's head of policy. You've listened to Geordin and to Mpho. What are your thoughts about the policy priorities of these cities, but also other local authorities after this election?
I mean, I think they're mirrored in what Geordin and Poole have been discussing. I mean, on getting the basics right, which, by the way, are not so basic in South Africa when you think about it. So most importantly, I would say out of those is water and electricity. The reason I say water is not so basic is that South Africa is a water-scarce country, and many areas outside of Cape Town, which we obviously saw in recent history, will be experiencing and are experiencing droughts and water shortages, and that is then compounded by infrastructure backlogs, etc. So that's what many governments especially newly formed governments are walking into, and what they'll need to resolve. And then on the electricity front as well, of course we need to focus on procuring electricity from independent power producers, but it has also been a commitment of the party to really encourage self-generation from households, from businesses. And I think the risk that it's a risk and an opportunity, though, that governments will have to confront, is that does affect government revenue that is so tied towards electricity provision. And I think it will be so important for DA governments to look ahead in a future where many households and businesses do generate electricity, and how that will affect city budgets. So I think building in resilience and future-proofing our local government should also be a really key focus for DA governments, to not just focus on the now, but really what's coming ahead.
Stay ahead of the curve.
Can I just add to that? Sure. I think Gwen makes such a brilliant point. So much of local government is spent in the present tense. It's dealing with exactly what's happening right now. And
even as the game is changing.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that we've done, as you said, in the first 60 days is set up a dedicated future thinking and resilience team in Cape Town to do some of that focused thinking about what the city energy utility of 30 years' time looks like. What does the demographic trends and urbanization trends in South Africa mean for a city of 10 million people in 25 years' time? And so I'm also very excited about that kind of future thinking and what that means for our policy setting and budgeting now.
Absolutely. Now, Gwen, you mentioned water. And the interesting thing about water is, if you want to see how well a municipality is doing on water, is to check how much water it loses in distributing that to consumers. And I think one key success of Cape Town, achieved obviously over many years, is that compared to the situation that Mpho is inheriting, your water losses are substantially lower. And that points to the importance of maintaining infrastructure and so on. But those innovative solutions are going to be important.
And if I can just also add, one thing that I think is really important is, and it may sound a bit technical and boring, but is the importance of actually data collection. And, working and trying to develop policies in South Africa is very difficult, because most of the time you don't even know enough to formulate a policy around. And I wonder how many governments in South Africa, if you went to them and said, on a ward-by-ward level, how many residents live here? What is the demographic breakdown of each ward? What is the age profile? What is the socioeconomic status of your ward? How often is there refuse collection in this ward? Just basic questions on each ward, that if we understood who the residents we're serving are and what their circumstances are like, would be much more effective at designing policy. But that kind of data either does not exist, we simply just don't collect it, or if it does, it's not easily accessible. And the problem with not having data be transparent is then, of course, if government doesn't even understand, you can be really sure that other policymakers and external parties also don't know what's going on.
And how do you hold them to account in the absence of clear data?
Yes, but not just for, I mean, of course, it's always great to have data public so that we can hold public institutions to account, but elsewhere in the world, the global developments are that actually the private sector, organizations, etc., can also weigh in and assist. So it's not only about being able to hold governments account, but for example, if you have a dashboard where anyone can log in and see every pothole currently in your city, then anyone can, if you think of each pothole as like a ticket, anyone can grab that pothole and decide to fix it, and they get reimbursed by government. But nobody knows at each point in time where every pothole is located, or I mean, that's just a minor example, but these are technologies that are being explored globally. But if you aren't wielding data in that way, then you actually render not only government ineffective, but any other potential public partners in addressing challenges that you may otherwise have.
That is such an important point, if I can just come in there.
Yes, sure.
You know, having been in government, both in Cape Town and in the Western Cape, you set yourself priorities, but you have to be able to get the data to measure where you start from, where you're going, and where you end in a fixed timescale. And you have to have early indicators of whether you're moving in the right direction. And getting that data is one of the biggest struggles you have in government, excuse me, because it doesn't exist and it's very hard to get. So we're a data-poor country, and we cannot govern well, let alone implement and determine whether policies are being successful without a tremendous focus on data.
So these are very exciting conversations to have, and it's great that we're having them, and there's so much potential bringing these new ways of looking at things in. But Helen, we ultimately also want to have this conversation about national government after 2024. So there's a lot of work to be done, but winning national political power is going to be crucial to saving this country. What are going to be the key success factors for the DA and our mayors if we want to play that leading role in national government after 2024 or beyond?
Well, the most critical success factor is to demonstrate the DA difference and make people feel it in their lives. People have to know, just as when you cross from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, immediately the road surface changes. You have to actually know the DA difference in your life. And you have to know that you will get a reliable bill. You will have to know that when you log a pothole, it'll be fixed in a certain amount of time. You will have to know that when you turn on your tap, fresh, clean drinking water will come out, that your government is doing whatever it can to shield you from load shedding, that there is at least a plan and progress on the plan to deliver reliable public transport. All of these issues make up the DA difference. And you only really see it over, let's say, 15, 20 years, as you're now seeing it in Cape Town. This is 15 years of DA government, a good base. Geordin still has to focus very much on getting the basics right, but boy, now he has the platform on which to be future-focused, to do really innovative things, to do really great things. And I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see the DA difference like never before. So we have to start off by saying, in the 12 places that we govern outright, no excuses. Absolute focus on delivering not only the basis, but on key innovations, getting the data, measuring progress, delivering results. Where we have coalitions, where they're simple coalitions of 2 or 3 parties, we need to do the same. No excuses. Our complex coalitions, like in Johannesburg, we've got this wonderful mayor, Mpho Phalatse, who is focused and who is really pulling the team together. The big challenge is that there are so many variables she cannot control. And the variables are what happened inside other parties, and you cannot believe how much money changes hands, how many promises are made, how much patronage is dished out behind the scenes to make people swap sides. So we need to show to the public that a personal choice is your right in a democracy, but it has huge consequences for yourself and for others, and there are variables that you can't see and that you're not even voting for that impact you. So obviously, in 2024, we're hoping to bring the ANC below 50% and to be the core of a new coalition at national level. And we certainly hope that it is a stable, focused coalition that agrees on some core aspects: the primacy of the Constitution and the rule of law, non-racialism, a market-based economy with social safety nets, and complete, accountable, transparent, service-delivering government. That is what we're looking at, and that is what we're aiming to achieve. And just as we have step-by-step saved towns and cities in South Africa, not enough, but we're making good progress, so we can save provinces and the country.
Gwen, keeping with 2024, the next national election, as Helen has repeatedly said, it's one thing to bring the ANC below 50% to win an election. It's another thing entirely to govern well. And so what do you think, from the DA's perspective, should be the national policy priorities looking at 2024 and beyond? And what can we expect from the DA in the run-up to there?
Well, I think in the road to 2024, we'll obviously have to realise that in realigning the South African political landscape, we do have to forge an agenda that is going to enjoy sort of not just bipartisan, I suppose multi-partisan support. And I think that agenda really happens on two fronts. And I think for me, the policy priorities lie in two areas. The first is obviously the priority of any government will be to dramatically improve the quality of life of every South African. Currently, how that has been mostly measured is we'd like to talk about access. So we talk about people with access to water or access to electricity. I think that has to change, because actually what South Africa has done since 1994 is dramatically increase access. But a lot of those people can't afford access. So we have an unsustainable situation in which the government's burden is rising whilst the taxpayer base is shrinking. And that's obviously an unsustainable position. So it'll be no use if what the new government does is simply increase access, if that access is off the back of a shrinking taxpayer base. We have to increase the number of people who have access to water, have access to electricity, but most importantly are paying for it for themselves. That is the measure, and we don't look at that enough. The second, on the economic front, is, again, if we talk about the priority of this government would be to increase economic growth. Economic growth, we do have spurts where the economy is growing, but it's misleading because the economy can grow off, let's say, an external or global commodities boom. We haven't really changed anything internally, structurally, to realign ourselves towards a longer-term economic growth path. And so, again, it's not just about looking at economic growth, but we really need to start talking about indicators that signal fundamental economic change. And by that I mean, I want us to talk more about how many businesses are created in South Africa each year. What is the average length of business survival? So many people start new businesses, but they don't survive for various reasons. So we have to look at new businesses being created. We have to make sure, so that's one measure. We have to measure business survival rates. How long does the average business survive, and how do we make sure that businesses survive? And thirdly, to make sure that those businesses are actually employing. Because again, if employment numbers might increase because suddenly the state or a government employs more people, that's not a win. We want to make sure that we are creating an environment in which new businesses are being created, new businesses are thriving, and most importantly, that they're actually then hiring and employing. So I think really the change lies in those two areas. Improving quality of life that is driven by actually improvement in individuals and households' economic circumstances. And how do we measure that improvement in households and communities' economic circumstances is to measure the real things, not just growth, but to actually measure business growth, business survival, and business employment.
And that, Geordin, you want to add?
Yeah, I do. I love that we're having this kind of in-depth policy discussion about what DA governments should be doing. And I just think it makes the choice. We're talking about 2024.
Yeah.
It makes the choice so stark. Because really what you see happening in the ANC is just a fight for political power, with almost no focus on actually what needs to happen in the country to improve people's lives, get the economy growing, get people out of poverty and into work. DA governments are having that discussion.
Yes.
That is the difference. And so that's what we've got to demonstrate. Helen talks about the DA difference. That's what we've got to demonstrate over the coming 2 years.
Yeah.
That here you have a government that delivers progress, more opportunity, better growth, and is focused on your life. Here you have one that is just about fighting for political power internally. That's what it's all about.
I was about to say that is the type of thinking that the DA is putting into this post-ANC future. But Mpho, I want to get to you in staying with the issue of national government failure. I see the media reporting that 13,000 police officers might have to be retrenched because of looming budget cuts. Now, in South Africa, we're not used to public servants being retrenched, and we certainly, shouldn't accept lightly that frontline service delivery staff get retrenched, while, for example, SAA and these other institutions stay afloat. But you seem to be going in an opposite direction, and you have announced that I think 1,800 new Johannesburg Metro Police officers will be deployed on the streets of your city to help keep the community safe. Is that an example of how municipalities have to step into the void left by national government?
Definitely, Cilliers. I think for Johannesburg specifically, being the economic hub, this is very important. It's an important determinant of economic growth. If you do a Google search on Johannesburg, the number one thing that comes up is Johannesburg safe? So whether it's residents, tourists, or investors, the one thing they're concerned about is safety in Johannesburg. You know, we've had COVID-19 and it's impacted negatively on the economy. We're on the road to economic recovery, and we cannot ignore the need to bring safety and security back to our streets, our homes, our businesses. We need to ensure that everyone feels safe. One area we're concerned about is the Joburg inner city. As you know, it is a hub of economic activity, but it's also a crime hotspot. And we will be deploying most of those police officers into the inner city. In fact, we've already started doing that. We've seen many businesses in recent times leave the inner city because of various concerns, including safety concerns. And we need to reverse this while we're on our road to recovery. And restoring safety to the inner city, for example, will restore confidence that the Joburg inner city is a safe place to live, to work, and to play. And you'll recall that in our manifesto promises, we promised residents integrated policing. We promised them that we will work closely in an integrated fashion with SAPs, with private policing agencies, as well as with our community policing forums. We've already started with these joint operations. I had one over the weekend, which was hugely successful. So yes, we're very serious about maintaining law and order in Johannesburg, restoring safety and security as we turn around the economy, making sure that the entire country benefits from the city of Johannesburg, which is in many ways the economic engine of this country and contributes significantly to the country's GDP.
So, Gwen, both Geordin and Mpho have spoken about how they refuse to colour within the lines provided to them by national government. They serve their communities, and they will do more than what has traditionally been associated with the function of local government. But one problem is that local government does operate within the constraints set by national government laws, grant funding, and so forth. How do you see these innovative, future-oriented governments breaking out of that mold and challenging that status quo? And is it really possible to sustain a vision like that?
I mean, I don't want to underestimate, the constraints that national laws do impose on what we can get done in other spheres of government. And I think to kind of excuse it too much gives sometimes the public false hope that, well, it's fine if the DA doesn't get into government nationally because we will find these other ways to circumnavigate. And I think it is important to say that, no, actually, if we want to see fundamental change, we have to have change happen at the national government level. But that said, at the moment, we do operate in the environment that we do. And I think hopefully something that can and I think should come out of these coalition agreements at the local level is hopefully greater cooperation at the national level too. I think when bills are put forward in the National Assembly, it usually is just every opposition party for themselves. And it might start, to be time for at the national level to see parties show a united front even at the national level. Why can't there be, an alternative or a multi-party budget that gets put together, as an alternative to the one that will be put forward by the current cabinet? Why can't there be already a multi-party policy on X and Y area or bill that comes forward. I think we should start to explore possibilities for cooperation at the national level, but we'd still be confronted with the reality that the ANC still does hold the majority, still does hold the numbers. And so other areas is to obviously start pushing a little bit more perhaps on the legal front. I think the DA's legal book has been very busy in recent years, obviously fighting corruption, and even now more recently with COVID, trying to fight irrational COVID restrictions, etc. But hopefully if space does open up there to start to actually take to court some of these areas where it is uncertain to what extent local governments or provincial governments can act. Certainly I know that in the opinions of some policymakers, there's a lot more room for provincial governments and for local governments to really assert themselves, bearing in mind that they're not actually sort of lower governments, so that the South African Constitution doesn't so much envision...
certain measure of autonomy.
Exactly. It doesn't envision so much a hierarchy, but there are separate spheres of government. So I think we really should push the envelope.
And Helen, when national government institutions fail outright, I mean, surely we can't just stand by and accept that. The Constitution can't be a straitjacket. And of course, the Constitution, the interpretation of the Constitution develops over time, even if the text of it stays the same. It must adapt to the realities.
There are very few areas of service delivery in South Africa where local, provincial and national government don't have to play some role. And the Constitution, for example, let's take electricity, gives local government the responsibility to reticulate energy and electricity to get it to households, but it gives national government the responsibility of generating and transmitting electricity. Now, obviously, local government can't do its job of reticulating electricity if national government isn't generating and transmitting electricity. And there's no reason why Geordin here should sit and say to his residents, I'm sorry, we are very ready to transmit electricity, to reticulate it to you all, but it's just the problem is the national government isn't generating it. If he wants to do his job, he has to step into the breach and generate it as well. Not personally, but the private sector has a massive capacity for generation. It's this monopoly of Eskom that is preventing it. He has to do his job under the Constitution, so he has to get the electricity from somewhere else. And his big defence in the Constitutional Court, if the national government were to challenge him, was to say, you're not doing your job. I have to do mine. And that is how it has to work. Exactly the same with water. When we were in crisis in day zero here, the national government's job is bulk water supply. The local government's job is to clean that water and to get it to households. If the national government is failing with bulk water, be it desalination, be it dams, be it underground aquifers, whatever, you can't just sit there and say to your residents, I'm terribly sorry, we would love to supply you with clean water, but we haven't got any. You've got to step in. We had to fix all the channels from the major dams that had been totally broken under the national government. We had to do a lot of desalination and other projects that we had to get into to make sure that we could deliver that water. So when the failing national government happens, which has happened everywhere, I mean, look at train stations. None of them function. Public transport is a complete train wreck, if I may use that term. Now, Geordin can't say our job is municipal public transport. I'm very sorry we can't do it because the national government isn't fulfilling their job. So more and more you have to say we have to move into that space. We haven't got the money to, but there's the private sector. They are dying to make the Southern Suburbs Railway line an absolute money spinner, which it could be all the way to Simonstown. And then you use that to cross-subsidise your Khayelitsha line. Now we have the buses going on the road to Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain again. Hallelujah. But more and more as national government fails, we have to turn to public-private partnerships between local and provincial government and the private sector who's dying to come in and say, let's do this.
So, Geordin, I think an important part of the national policy reform that we might need to look at is how do you make these private partnerships easier, cheaper, less regulated, but also, provide for the risks that might arise?
I think because of all of the national failures that you and Helen have referred to, this is going to happen by default over the next few years, and we must just make sure that we're at the leading curve, the leading edge of the curve. Because if I look at what Cape Town is actually already doing in power generation, and what we're about to do in going much, much further, really reaching utility scale, public-private partnership, power generation for Cape Town to reduce our reliance on Eskom and over time end load shedding in Cape Town. We're just going to go ahead and blaze that trail. There might be a whole lot of concerns and objections from various national interests, but actually, as Helen says, we have a basic responsibility. We've just got to press ahead and set the precedent, and there'll be opportunities to get legal clarity through the courts in one or two of these big matters. But we actually can't wait for that clarity because the service is collapsing now, or is already collapsed in the case of rail. We've just got to move ahead.
Yeah. Mpho, because Geordin is staying with me for the next discussion, I would like to give you the last word and to tell us what the residents of Johannesburg, despite these political challenges that the coalition government faces, what could they expect from your administration in the next few months?
Well, I mean, staying with the theme of national government failures, you know that Joburg has a huge energy crisis, and it's quite a complex crisis in Johannesburg. We have inadequate capacity, and it's as a result of various factors. We've got poor infrastructure maintenance that's happened over the last 28 years. We've got backyard dwellings in areas like Soweto. We've got informal settlements, over 200 at the moment, I believe. And they're all increasing our demand for electricity against a limited supply. We also have illegal connections, mainly because of these informal settlements. We've got cable theft, vandalism of infrastructure, and Eskom has really failed us as a city. The city is planning to host an energy indaba in March, where we will invite various players in the energy space. These are innovators, academics, entrepreneurs, law enforcement, to really look closely at Joburg's energy crisis and come up with solutions to turn it around in the quickest possible time. We've started declaring war on cable theft. We're working with communities to identify culprits and make sure that our bylaws are enforced. We'll also be establishing a specialized unit to deal with illegal connections and make sure that we reduce unnecessary power outages. But there's many other things we're working on. We'll be working on in the short term, starting an institutional review to make sure that the institution can support our turnaround strategy. We'll be reviewing critical policies and processes, including getting the city back to work at 100% within February, March 2022. A lot of people have been on holiday with COVID, working from home without any proper performance management system in place. We'll be launching a centralized management platform where we'll have a one-stop shop where you can access your account, report potholes or malfunctioning traffic lights, can apply for your license disc renewal, and you can even pay your traffic fines. So this is something which will be our gift to our residents to make it easy to interface with the city. And we'll continue the implementation of our web-based construction permit management system, which will reduce turnaround times for building plans. The approvals now can take anything up to 30 days. We'll reduce them to 10 days for now, in line with our ease of doing business promise to our residents. And these are just a few of the things that we're cooking up for our residents. Very exciting developments. The most important thing is to keep the coalition together and make sure that we stay true to our promise.
And that's what we call getting the basics right.